Hi there and welcome to the Advent IM podcast. Not something we've done before, but we thought, well, we're a communication type of company and we'd like to have an opportunity to talk about a whole range of business issues that affect security, that come around the edges of security, and where security is often on the edge of business. So what we're going to plan to do is a series of podcasts speaking to a range of different people looking at different issues and hopefully give you something a little bit less formal, but also something that's quite interesting. So I thought, hey, as we're starting off talking about communications, where better to go than to start with a communications specialist. So with me today is Ellie Hurst, Communications and Marketing Manager here at Advent IM. Ellie, at the National Cybersecurity Centre conference in Manchester, Joanna Place, who is the Chief Operating Officer at the Bank of England, said that security is no different from other areas of expertise when it comes to talking to the board. And security people, as we know from a lot of the research that's been published, are really struggling with this area to communicate with their board. Why do you think that's so?
I think there's a range of reasons why it's a struggle. I think sometimes security has been not as participatory in the boardroom as it might have been, and there's a kind of a disconnect between the two areas, which is a huge shame. But it's not just between security and the board. I think we can sometimes find that lack of cohesion within the business as well. And Mike, as you well know, sometimes we don't even find information security risk on corporate risk registers. It sits somewhere else, and that's part of that mindset, I think, of that very separateness. But in terms of communication, what you have is a business language that has grown up on one side and then a security language that has grown up on the other, and they don't always meet in the middle.
So very few boards are going to have a genuine security expert, whether that's physical security or cyber security, to be honest. Very few boards will have a security expert on the board, whereas in most cases we expect boards of directors to be fluent in finance and health and safety these days and a whole range of other things. Where can communication specialists help us to bridge that gap?
I think in actually working with security professionals to actually tailor the message to try and communicate both ways, which will help boards get better quality information that turns into something that's actionable, so insight, rather than just reports that they maybe don't even look at or fully understand and they're not engaged with. If the activity that the security teams are carrying out are not reducing risk, then we're falling down somewhere. Our businesses are falling down somewhere because we're missing opportunities to build resilience. And so if there is a kind of an interpreter, if you like, that can act on a temporary basis to try and bridge that gap with a view to sort of future-proofing it by helping them to tailor their communication in whatever way is required, then that means that we've got a real opportunity to really start and make a difference. And that goes across a business. That's not just between security and boardrooms, that's between different silos within a business as well, with things like training and education.
So why would a communication specialist be likely to be listened to where perhaps a security specialist wouldn't?
Well, Mike, there's plenty of people that would argue that point, actually. So not necessarily. I think it's all about positioning, actually. I think a lot of communications people understand positioning very well, and so they can take the key messages that come out of a particular security issue or set of issues or something that needs to be communicated, draw out the headlines and say, okay, this is what you really need to communicate, and to get the best attention, this is going to be the way to do it. Because let's face it, communications people, we're used to trying to get everybody's attention one way or another, with varying degrees of success, it must be said. But that's basically, in essence, that's why.
So this is a skill that traditionally, when we use the term marketing, and quite often now we see the role position as marketing and communications.
Yes.
But marketing, I think most of us, when we hear that word, we think of sending the message from the organisation out to a particular community, to our customer base or our client partners or whatever. So what we're advocating here, if I've understood it correctly, is to take a skill that has long been used for that and to turn it 180 and actually use it to put messaging back into the business.
Yeah, what we're talking about is 360 it really, because we're trying to repurpose that skill set in order to push it throughout a business, as well as there's a danger sometimes that if you work in this kind of area that you're kind of permanently on broadcast, and you see an awful lot of that. If you look at social media, it's like permanent broadcast, and it's difficult sometimes to get that back and forth going. But if we're not listening to what's coming back to us, then we can't tailor what we're doing, and therefore what you end up with is a kind of echo chamber. What I'm suggesting that communications can do is to try and break up some of that echo chamber, change some of the language, reposition things, repackage things, and then put them back into the business as little bits of insight, little bits of information, little bit of maybe change your practice. Maybe we could do it this way. Maybe there's a better way. There's all sorts of things that we could be contributing to. So realistically, what I'm saying is the communication needs to come back as well. So it's not just security sat on broadcast to the rest of the business or to the boardroom, but they're able to communicate back and say, actually, I really like that report that you did for me, or I really enjoyed that presentation. I understand X and Y and Z a lot better. But what I'd really like to know is this, and could you present this to me in the same way? Or could you maybe change it in some way? And to be able to communicate that back in a way that actually turns into, again, something that's actionable. So insight.
So actually looking at the format in which we're presenting information to our boards is just as important as the language that we're using as well.
I believe so, yeah. And people digest information, particularly information that might be a little bit scary or intimidating or outside of their comfort zone. They're going to perceive it in very different ways, and in order to get the most out of that and for us to actually make a difference, we need to make sure that it has been tweaked in exactly the right way to get the right response, because what you want is to enable people. You want them to feel like they're part of something, that this is an important part of what they do on a daily basis, and that what they do actually contributes to the overall resilience of their business. To build that as a kind of like, wouldn't this be great if we could manage this and we're all in this, trying to make this better all together. That's the kind of nirvana where, information is being shared between teams, where communication is tailored towards individual teams, maybe training material as well. Training and educational content is tailored as well, with messaging and examples that are pertinent to the team that you're trying to inform and educate, because then what you get is just something that gets bigger and bigger and better, and people just grow in their knowledge and understanding of not just what they need to do, but why they need to do it.
But doesn't this then require that the communication specialist themselves is able to speak both languages? They've got to speak the language of cyber or the language of security, and they've got to speak the language of business.
Oh yes, now you've got me where I breathe. This is something that has been a tiny bit of a frustration for me at times. So I joined the security industry 7 years ago now, and there's been a handful of communicators and marcomms people that I've come across who really want to talk about security, not in product terms but in concept terms, and in how they're going to push that out into businesses. So actually, I would use this as a kind of siren call to all of those people as well, that you have got so many valuable skills that you can use. Try and turn some of that time and effort into knowing a little bit more about the industry as a whole, so that we can come together and communicate more effectively as one. There's a great big voice of us, there's a big body of us that we could make a real difference. And as far as I'm concerned, if you work in security and you have a responsibility to make a difference, that's why we're all doing what we're doing. And I believe that all activity can reduce risk, and that includes us in communications too.
I think that's an interesting word that you've just picked up on there, is risk. And one of the things I see quite a lot is that security reports go to the board and they're very factually based, but they're not very good at actually articulating the so what, the risk, or the potential for damage or harm to the brand or to the organisation or to its assets if those risks are realised. What can we do collaboratively, the security people and the communications people, to change that?
I think one of the first things that we can do is examine the way we actually think about protective security and risk, and think, we all need to protect our brand. This is our livelihood. Our organisations and our businesses that we work in, this is everyone's livelihood, and so therefore everyone who works within that has got an obligation to protect that brand. And people who understand branding, well, there's a lot of us that work in communications, and once you can communicate that to communications people, we all need to protect our brand. I think what you'll find is that suddenly things will start to change, things will start to move.
So there you have it, guys. If you've got a communications person in your organisation and that communications person isn't part of your communications plan to help you to communicate with your people and to help you to communicate effectively with your board, if they're not actively involved in helping you to articulate risk in a matter that to the board comes across as a so what, as a call to action, then you've got to be thinking maybe you're missing a huge part of the solution here. Maybe you have a resource that's massively underutilised. Maybe in time, it might even result in us, in the security world, becoming better communicators ourselves.
Thanks for your time, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the podcasts that come in future.
Thanks, Ellie.
Bye.